Hello everyone, I'm going to begin the first training module, which is Diversity, a Scouting Perspective. For those of you who have sat through our diversity training before, it's going to be pretty similar. We are basically just going to have a very introductory, basic talk and discussion about what diversity is, various social problems that may arise, and how diversity really relates to our work here within the reservation. So the first question, right, obviously is what is diversity? And that's a very large question that we're not going to even begin to touch upon really in this 10-15 minute training module. But some of the sub questions we have for this question is, how does diversity impact us all? What does diversity look like? And what is it like? How does it feel to be different, right? Diversity is one of those words I think we can wrap our minds around. We have a sense of what it looks like. We have a sense of some of the complications that may arise because of diversity, but it's hard to define, right? Diversity, if you ask different people how they would define diversity, they would probably have very different answers, and that stems from different backgrounds, different experiences, different levels of education, and you know, a person's perception of diversity is very different because of these factors, right? One of these, the first sub questions, how does diversity impact us all, is probably something very important that I want you to keep in mind as we progress through this summer, right? Diversity and social issues that affect one set population does impact all of us in some way, shape, or form, right? Just because you don't belong to population X does not mean that population X's problems or their oppression does not affect you. It does. Uh, so that's something I think to keep in mind moving forward. Some of the more training objectives for this training module. Number one, staff members will have a greater understanding of the ways people are diverse and come to appreciate these differences. Two, staff members will be able to identify issues of diversity and social problems and how to respond to them. And three, really relating to our work here in the reservation, staff members will understand the sensation of not fitting in with others from the perspective of themselves and the perspective of Boy Scouts who come into our reservation. So, this is a quote that I heard a couple years ago, right? Normal is a setting on a washing machine. And what is this really getting at? If you've been on camp before, you've been on camp staffing before, you've heard me say this quote a million times. Everybody's different, and that's okay. So, what does this really mean? Let's just take a second to break it down. We're talking about personal identities here. We're talking about the sensation that everybody is unique, right? That everybody has different experiences and brings different ideas to the table, right? And think of it this way. If you were to paint a picture of anything, let's say you're going to paint a picture of a school, right? But you only had the color red to paint this picture with, right? You had a red crayon. The picture is not going to have a lot of color to it, right? The picture is going to look probably very bland, and it's not going to look right. You're not going to be able to have the details of perhaps maybe the grass or the white roof, right? Maybe you don't have a blue sky, right? Because you only have this red crayon. If you have a set of crayons, so one of those big 120 color crayon boxes, right? Your picture becomes more detailed. There's more expression to that picture, and I think that is a really good analogy that having individuals from very diverse backgrounds does bring in a lot of details. It does bring in a lot of color, right? To these pictures and to these projects and to our camp staff as well. So what does it mean to feel different? You know, all of us have experienced through our lives some sense of adversity, some sense of isolation, and when we feel excluded, that obviously doesn't feel very good. I mean, I don't need to really tell you that. But how does this directly relate to scouts who feel different when they come inside the reservation? Well, I strongly believe that attending a summer camp is one of the greatest memories and greatest experiences that a scout will have throughout their entire scouting career. You know, a lot of us can probably contest to that. It certainly was for me. So, what happens when a scout comes to our camp, comes for a week of summer camp, and they feel different? They feel excluded. They don't feel like they're part of their troops. They don't feel like they're part of their friend groups for whatever reason. No, this is something we really need to focus on, something we really need to take seriously. Because scouts who come to camp and they feel isolated, they're going to want to go home, right? They're not going to feel connected to their other scouts or their scout leaders, so they're going to maybe feel mistrustful, right? And scouts who exclude themselves or feel isolated feel like they have no sense of belonging at camp. And having a very poor camp experience can, unfortunately, sometimes result in scouts leaving the scouting program. So, what are the best ways to increase retention within scouts coming back to camp and scouts staying within the larger scouting program as a whole? Right? It's all about inclusion. It's all about making sure scouts feel welcome and feel like they have a purpose in the reservation and feel like they have a purpose in their troops and feel like they are a contributing member to the scouting organization, and that not only are they getting something out of the scouting organization, but they're also giving something to the scouting organization as well. So here are some common definitions that I think I'd like to go over, just because we sometimes use these as synonyms, even though they're not, right? And they might come up during the summer. So the first one is stereotype. And we've heard all these words before, but the first one is stereotype. And a stereotype is basically an idea or it's a characteristic, right? Uh, there's really not an emotion attached to a stereotype. It's just a perception, right? Uh, so the exact definition is general attitudes or beliefs that all members of a group share the same characteristic. You know, every member of population X has this feature about them. Prejudice is where that positive or negative emotion or attitude comes in, right? It's the piece where, you know, people start to have a perception of individuals or a perception of a population that's either positive or negative. And sometimes stereotypes are rooted within prejudice. The exact definition of prejudice is a positive or negative attitude towards individuals simply because of their membership in a group. The last definition is discrimination. And discrimination is the physical, behavioral, or component, the physical, behavioral, or action component to prejudice, right? So the exact definition is differential treatment of individuals who belong to different groups, the behavioral component of prejudice. So we see stereotypes rooted within prejudice, and we see prejudice rooted within discrimination. It's important to kind of understand these differences a little bit and make sure we don't use these words interchangeably in our work and in our daily lives, because they do mean different things. So there is a principle called the epigenetic principle that I learned in every single one of my human development classes. And it basically says this: the fundamental understanding of our psychological, physical, and social development since birth is known as the epigenetic principle. What does that mean? Well, basically it's saying that every experience you have, every memory, every piece of knowledge that you learn impacts you in some way. Right? So every experience that we have since our birth influences us in some way, and that can either be a positive or a negative influence. So scouts who attend camp, scouts who come to camp, are going to be very exposed to epigenetic development, right? Uh, Going to a summer camp is a very, very strong influence on their later development, a child's later development. And a lot of the times, scouts will leave camp saying, hey, I had a great time. That was fantastic. And they're going to learn a lot that they're going to use later in their scouting careers and maybe even later into their adult lives. You, as staff, have a very, very important responsibility of making sure that camp is memorable, that camp has a essential component to it uh, to help this sort of growth within our scouts. So, what are the ways in which a person can be diverse? When we think about diversity and we think about social problems, these are kind of the, I would say, uh, uh, categories or features that people hear about the most, that you hear about problems relating to these components, or uh, like this list the most, right? They are race, ethnicity, sexual orientation or sexuality, gender, age, social class, education, physicality, and then mental awareness. Those are kind of the big ones, and we're not going to really go into those so much within this training, as this training is really just a basic introduction to these problems. At any point during the summer, should you feel the need to talk about an issue relating to one of these, please never feel as if you can't talk about these issues, and we can definitely have a conversation about anything that is troubling you. So I'm going to use race here as an example, right, of a common misconception, right? So race is actually a social construction. It's a human invention. What does that mean? So race is not rooted in biology. It's something that uh, it's something that was constructed to categorize people in our daily lives, right? So social constructions are created for political, economic, or social reasons. So race in and of itself is not rooted in biology. It's not in our nature as individuals uh, to to just understand that race is something that's different. We're taught that race means that people are different, and we're taught this by different factors, right? Different factions. First socialization systems include the family and in our education system. Public schools, going to college, right? These are really important socialization systems where our perceptions of ourselves and perceptions of others are really rooted and understood. These are reinforced by reinforced socializations or secondary socializations, which include our government, our economy, media, and organizations such as the Boy Scouts of America. So, to kind of sum that up, right, this leads us to believe that racism, hatred, prejudice, stereotypes, discrimination are not rooted in our biology. They're not rooted in our nature as humans. They're in fact taught and shared. We are conditioned by our environment, we're conditioned by our education, we're conditioned by our family life to believe in these things, to have racism, prejudice, or understand these stereotypes or have hatred for other people. Diverse expression is a conception that let me just read the definition. So, diverse expression is the degree to which an individual is willing to express, communicate, and share specific values, attributes, and beliefs upon a personal reflection of their diverse background. So, what does that mean? It means that different people are more or not willing to talk about issues relating to their diverse identity or issues relating to their personal growth or their personal being, right? And we should, as staff, supporting each other and supporting our scouts, be aware that some people feel uncomfortable discussing some of these topics, discussing some of these social diversity issues, and that's okay. These topics are, these topics are tough to talk about, and they should be. Having meaningful, difficult conversations about these topics are the only way that we're going to really progress in our society and have healthy human interaction. Uh, but not everybody is willing and ready to be able to have those conversations yet. So that's just something I think we should keep in mind. Please do not pressure each other to talk about these issues. Uh, you know, Laughing and joking about these issues is not really okay either. Uh, People might feel uncomfortable based upon some of the jokes that are made, some of the things that are said about these issues. If you want to talk about some diversity problems, some social issues, those discussions are probably better with maybe an area director or myself as the program director or member of administration if there's a serious issue regarding some of these social topics. So, we've seen a lot of change within the Boy Scouts of America organization lately. So, do not believe that camp is immune to social problems or diversity issues. For a lot of people, camp is a sanctuary where people can come and feel safe, feel maybe isolated from the outside world, but our organization in and of itself is changing and it is becoming more in tune with our modern society, right? So just in the past couple of years, the Boy Scouts approved to allow in openly gay members. Boy Scouts allowed transgender boys to join within the past couple of years, right? We have many, many scouts who come to camp with special needs or have disabilities and need different resources and different aspects of support for them to get more out of the scouting program. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard the Boy Scouts are changing their name to Scouts BSA. Just the Boy Scouting portion of the larger Boy Scouts America is changing their name. But girls are being welcomed into the Cub Scout program. We are going to see in the next couple of years the development of girl troops, right? So our organization is changing. We need to be aware of these changes, and we need to educate ourselves on these changes. So this is why diversity issues are important, because these populations are coming to camp, and they're going to step through our reservation, and they're going to expect the same great experience as we give any other scout within our reservation. So, specifically relating to diversity within scouting, how can scouts identify themselves, right? Through age, maybe it's through leadership position, it's through rank and experience, skill, whether they've been on a high adventure trip or not. They're different based upon the merit badges and the different awards that they've earned. They're different based upon their campsite and their troop and the town they're from, right? So diversity doesn't have to relate to some of these like large social issues such as sexuality, gender, race. We see diversity in probably, uh, for lack of a better word, these smaller components of life, right? And those are important to keep in mind too. Some of the larger problems that we might have at camp relating to diversity is probably going to stem maybe from scouts arguing over a leadership position or scouts not getting along because they're from two different troops. This leads into diversity harassment, right? And this is the really core component piece of this training. So if you take nothing else away, take this away. Diversity harassment is rooted within youth protection a little bit. It's basically the understanding that we want to ensure that scouts are safe physically, emotionally, mentally, socially within our reservation and within the Boy Scouting program. So if you suspect that a scout, a leader, or another staff member within our reservation is a victim of diversity harassment. Uh, what does that mean, right? Uh, if you think somebody is really struggling with one of these social problems, or they're being teased because of maybe a diverse aspect of their identity, maybe they're being uh, really harassed and feel very uncomfortable because of some comments someone else made, or maybe some actions or discrimination that has been taken against them. Should you feel that a case of diversity harassment is occurring for one of our Scouts leaders or another one of you, please, 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 right? Contact your area director, contact the program director, contact the camp director, and we will help you solve this issue. This is something that is not taken lightly, and we will respond to the best of our ability uh, in regards to handling issues of diversity harassment. To end on a more positive note, right? Reforming modern diversity is a key component to the progress we're making in society. I have on the screen here just a very small example of how handicapped parking signs are now changing to reserved parking signs, right? And you can see that not only the wording has changed, but the image of the person in the wheelchair is also changing. Uh, excuse me. The image of the person in the wheelchair is also changing to suggest that individuals who are disabled also can have a very active life, can still have a very active life, as you can see by the stick figure being a little more mobile in the reserved parking sign. So change is coming to our society. It is slow, unfortunately, but it's coming. So what's the big deal, right? How is this study and appreciation of diversity reflected in the values of the Boy Scouts of America? And what's the point of this training, right? I've talked a little bit about this throughout the uh, entire presentation, right? But I think I just like to leave you with this, that we, again, have a responsibility to create a community within our camp that is welcoming of all scouts, of all scout leaders, and it's important to create a environment which we as a staff feel comfortable working, feel comfortable living, and it's important to treat each other with kindness and respect and appreciation for our differences, right? That's the big deal. People who feel different, people who feel isolated, uh, you know, strongly correlate to a lack of retention within the scouting program, a lack of retention within our staff, right? Um, and we want to treat people with kindness and respect and appreciation for each other.